You're watching Study with Sudhir. This is your digital classroom. My name is Sudhir. We are looking at the Tempest, which is part of the ISC class 11 and 12 English literature syllabus. In explanation video number 1 of Act 2 Scene 1, we saw how the 6 gentlemen, Alonso, Gonzalo, Sebastian, Antonio, Adrian and Francisco are marooned on another part of the island, and what is actually transpiring between these 6 gentlemen. In part 2, the conversation goes ahead and leads on to the final part of this particular scene, in which there is some definite action which takes place, which has a very significant bearing on the play and also brings out the characters of both Sebastian and Antonio in very stark light, and that's the most important part. So this part 2 explanation video will actually lead on to what will finally unfold in the second part of this particular Act 2 Scene 1. So significant in that sense, and there are quite a few chunks in this particular explanation video which are important from the examination point of view. So I would request you to pay heed to this particular explanation. I hope you have gone through the first part so that it's clear and we are going in a chronological manner, right? Now, towards the end of the explanation video number 1, we saw that both Sebastian and Antonio are poking fun at Gonzalo and telling him about how he would wrap this entire island and gift it to his son almost like an apple, at which point in time Antonio says that he will sow the kernels of it in the sea and bring forth more islands. Again, things a bit of a nonsensical kind of a dialogue, things which can obviously not take place in real life. Now Gonzalo reacts by saying A. Now it's not very clear. The reason for Gonzalo saying A is actually not very clear, but it seems to be like a reaction to Alonso, right? Because Alonso has now come back into the conversation, right? So he's reacting to Alonso, and Alonso has probably also overheard the last bit of the conversation. Antonio, oh why, in good time, almost as if again reacting to Alonso coming back into the conversation. Gonzalo, then addressing Alonso, says, we were talking that our garments seem as fresh as we were at Tunis at the marriage of your daughter, who is now queen. So he's now repeating the point that he had made earlier, that the garments that we are wearing seem to be as fresh as they were when we wore them during the marriage of Claribel, your daughter, who is now queen of Tunis, and the rarest that ever came there. Now the rarest of this thing, and she's also the best queen that Tunis could have ever got. Sebastian referring to saying that, Bait, I beseech you, widow Dido. So Bait is saying, now don't mention widow Dido, you know, because in the earlier part we had seen that he had made the mistake of referring to Dido as a widow, after which there was a lot of criticism by both Antonio and Sebastian. So now Sebastian is now beseeching him, meaning that he requesting him, do not mention widow Dido all over again, right? Oh widow Dido, widow Dido, again kind of mocking Gonzalo. Gonzalo, is not, sir, my doublet as fresh as the first day I wore it, I mean in a sort. Now this is an important reference, because out here doublet is a close fitting body garment with or without sleeves. In a sort means in a sense. Now why is this in a sort important? Because earlier he was seeming much more confident about the fact that the garments were indeed as fresh as they were when they were worn the first time, in fact full of gloss. This time he's a little more doubtful, perhaps a reaction to the fact that earlier both Sebastian and Antonio had made fun of him. So this time he kind of says in a sort, in a sense, in the sense that not absolutely fresh, not absolutely glossy, but almost there kind of a thing. So Antonio immediately picks up on that sort was well fished for. Fished for means as in hunted, you know, and that sort, saying that that qualification that you have referred to was kind of well targeted. So he's kind of saying in a more ridiculing kind of manner. Alonso says, you cram these words into mine ears against the stomach of my sense. Now this is an important piece of dialogue. Would I had never married my daughter there, for coming thence my son is lost, and in my rate she too, who is so far from Italy removed, I never again shall see her. O thou mine heir of Naples and of Milan, what strange fish hath made his mail on thee? Of Milan is an important reference Now Alonso is clearly irritated by Gonzalo, right? And he's saying the word cram out here essentially is a reference to the image of force feeding, that you try to force feed someone against that person's wishes, right? And this is connected to the imagery of eating that is there in this entire piece of dialogue. So he says that you are kind of forcing your words into my ears against my wishes. So the stomach of my sense, in that sense, is a visual imagery of sorts, because it means that against my inclination to accept your words, you are actually forcing your words into my ears and into my mind. But Alonso is using this imagery of eating, and therefore the use of the word stomach of my sense, and that all this is being done against the will and wish of Alonso. And he says, would I have ever married my daughter there? So now he is regretting the fact that he has married his daughter to such a far off place, given the fact that he believes that, O thou mine heir of Naples and of Milan, what strange fish hath made his meal on thee. So he believes that Ferdinand is now dead, and he was the heir to the throne of both Naples and Milan. And why Milan? Because when Alonso had helped Antonio overthrow Prospero, the then Duke of Milan, this was on the condition that Milan would become subservient, like a colony of Naples, right? And also pay taxes to Naples. And this was obviously not the case when Prospero was the Duke, because we have seen it in Act 1, Scene 2, Prospero making the reference and telling Miranda that, he and Naples were at loggerheads with each other. They were not a colony, they were not a subject of Naples, they were not subservient to Naples. But under Antonio, Milan has now become subservient to the kingdom, to the dukedom of Naples. Thence means during our return, all these things have transpired, the Tempest, the shipwreck, and now all of them being marooned on this island, and Ferdinand going missing, which Alonso is interpreting as his death. So he says that I've lost my daughter because I got married her to a far off land like Tunis, and also he's lamenting the death of Ferdinand at the same time, and saying that which fish is it that has made you its meal. Again, the reference to the visual imagery of eating. Now Francisco, the other noble who has not spoken so far. Earlier we heard Adrian speaking, now it is Francisco speaking. Francisco says, Sir, he may live. I saw him beat the surges under him and ride upon their backs. He trod the water whose enmity he flung aside, and breasted the surge most swollen that met him. His bold head bove the contentious waves he kept, and oared himself with his good arms in lusty stroke to the shore that over his wave-worn bases bore, as stooping to relieve him. I not doubt he came alive to land. He came alive to land is an important phrase, key phrase, please mark it. There are lots of important keywords that you would do well to use if ever there is a character analysis or a character description of Ferdinand that is asked of you in the examination, like good arms, in lusty stroke, that oared himself. Basically, this is presenting a very different side of Ferdinand from what we have seen so far in Act 1, Scene 2, when we saw him in conversation with both Prospero and Miranda. Now, Francisco thinks that Ferdinand would be alive, right? And this dialogue, as I said, brings out a different aspect of Ferdinand, because there he was almost like hopelessly in love. Here it is presenting a more courageous and a brave image of Ferdinand, that he actually flung, I saw him beat the surges under him. So he's talking about the hostility of the sea waters, the fact that the sea waters were very rough, yet Ferdinand actually managed to beat the hostility of those sea waters. He flung them aside, and his head was always above the waters, and is referring to his strong and powerful arms. Wave-worn is essentially a reference to the tired body, but yet he says that the waters stooping to relieve him, right? So he says that the waters were actually reducing their height in order to receive Ferdinand, right? So it's almost like, he's kind of putting him on a pedestal. He's talking of him in rather an exaggerated sense. This, of course, is also an illusion which was created by Ariel, but this is what Francisco thinks he saw, and he obviously believes what he saw. No, he's gone. But Alonso continues with his state of mind. He's sad, and he strongly believes, he's convinced that he has lost his son, the heir to the throne of Naples and Milan. Sebastian, sir, you may thank yourself for this great loss that would not bless our Europe with your daughter, but rather lose her to an African. Now, Sebastian seems to convey at least if we take it at face value out here, that he seems to be fond of his niece, and he's pointing out that he along with Claribel were never in favor of Claribel marrying the Prince of Tunis. So, and he had requested Alonso not to get her married to such a far off land. And Claribel also did not want to, but Alonso did not listen. So Sebastian at this point in time is rubbing it in. He wants to emphasize that the state that we find ourselves in is all because of Alonso's doing. That you have no one else to blame but yourself, right? That you have only yourself to blame for what has happened, and that Europe has suffered a loss and because you gave her to Tunis. Now, Sebastian's sharp words is also to convey that Alonso blundered by not listening to his advice and put everyone in this particular state because we all submitted to you. You were kneeled and importuned otherwise by all of us, and the fair soul herself weighed between lothness and obedience. At which end of the beam should bow? We have lost your son, I fear forever. Milan and Naples have more widows in them of this business making than we bring men to comfort them. The fault is your own. So he is saying, in sharp contrast to what Francisco said just now, who believed that he came alive to land, he believes that we have lost Ferdinand forever. You know, I fear forever, right? The fair soul that is mentioned out here in the second sentence is a reference to Claribel. And he says that she was confused, she was in a fix on what she should do because while she hated the idea of getting married to the Prince of Tunis because it was such a far away land, she was confused between her own disapproval of the match that her father was getting for her and the fact that she would be considered disobedient and impertinent if she actually went against what her father was asking her to do. So she was in a fix, and this is what Sebastian is articulating about his niece's state of mind at that time. And the consequence, he says, is that only the 6 of us are survivors. That is Alonso, Sebastian, Antonio, Gonzalo, Adrian and Francisco, because he believes that everyone else who was there on that ship has perished, right? So he says that only the 6 of us are survivors, rest everyone has died, which is why there are more widows now today in Naples and in Milan than the number of men. That is just as half a dozen men who can actually go back and comfort them, right? That's the meaning of this particular piece of dialogue. So is the dearest of the lost. But Alonso says, well, if I am to be blamed, as you seem to think, am I also not the worst sufferer? And how is he the worst sufferer? Because he believes that Ferdinand, his son, has died. He believes that he has also lost his daughter Claribel forever, having married her to a far off land. And this also kind of conveys a slightly combative side of Alonso, that even while he's sad, he's actually giving it back to Sebastian, saying that is it that I am also not the worst sufferer? I am the sufferer. If I am to blame, I am also suffering the most, right? So I am in that sense suffering for what you think were my mistakes, that the mistakes that I committed, right? Gonzalo now steps in. My Lord Sebastian, the truth you speak doth lack some gentleness and time to speak it in. You rub the sore when you should bring the plaster. So he says, Gonzalo points out the lack of civility, the lack of gentleness on part of Sebastian to actually say these kind of very blunt words to the King of Naples. He says that even if it's a truth, the truth you speak doth lack some gentleness. That even if it is indeed the truth, it lacks gentleness in the manner in which it is actually being conveyed to the King of Naples, that you were actually supposed to be putting a balm on Alonso's wounds, but instead of that, you're actually rubbing salt on his wounds, rub the sore, right? That's what he's doing at this point in time, right? Making it more difficult, making it more painful for Alonso. Well, Sebastian, frankly, is very well, you could almost imagine it with a shrug of his shoulders. He couldn't care less. And then Antonio says that he's doing it almost like a licensed surgeon. It's foul weather in us all, good sir, when you are cloudy. Now, Gonzalo is addressing Alonso. He's saying that when you are not in a good mood, sir, we also feel sad. And Sebastian immediately picks on that word, foul weather. Antonio, very foul. Had a plantation of this isle, my lord. Now Gonzalo continuing to converse with Alonso. He says that he's trying to also comfort Alonso by talking about other things, even though Alonso is in no mood to listen to that. So he said that if I were given permission to plant trees, in that sense colonize this particular island and convert it to a colony, but before he can conclude his sentence, finish his sentence, both Sebastian and Antonio start speaking and trolling him at the same time. They say that he would actually sow it with nettle seeds. Now nettle seeds are essentially prickly plants, plants which are of no use, or docks or mallows, So he's saying that if he were actually to do so, he would essentially plant it with roadside weeds, which again are waste. And then Gonzalo says, and were the king on it, what would I do? So he's saying that if I were the king on this particular island, what is it that I would do? Sebastian says you would escape because there will be no, escape being drunk because there will be no wine to drink. Again mocking him. But now the next piece of dialogue by Gonzalo is important. Gonzalo says, in the Commonwealth I would by contraries execute all things, for no kind of traffic would I admit, no name of magistrate, letters should not be known, riches, poverty and use of service, none, contract, succession, bone, bound of land, tilth, vineyard, none, no use of metal, corn or wine or oil, no occupation, all men idle, all, and women too, but innocent and pure. Let me just, and sovereignty. Let me just go through each one of the words. Now, when you are referring to by contraries, now by contraries is a reference to quite otherwise, right? Also, it is in a way which is opposite of being familiar. Traffic is a reference to trade, not traffic the way we understand, but is essentially referring to trade. Letters are a reference to literature, right? That letters should not be known, that literature will not be known. Then bone, B-O-U-R-N, means limit, right? Tilth means tillage, as in agriculture. And sovereignty means exercise of supreme power, essentially referring to being a king. Now, what is important is that this particular passage that has been attributed to Gonzalo, it seems that this political philosophy that Gonzalo is actually articulating is based on a section of Montaigne's essay of the cannibal. So Shakespeare has picked it up from there. Montaigne spelling being M-O-N-T-A-I-G-N-E. It's an essay that he had written of the cannibals. So basically what he is trying to say, that his kingdom will be very different. It will be a very different kind of a republic. No one will be rich, no one will be poor, no one will serve the other. There will be no succession, there will be no contract, there will be no boundaries of land, in the sense that I cannot say that this piece of land belongs to me. So in that sense, he's talking about a different kind of a utopia, a perfect kind of a place, but it's a very strange kind of a perfection that Gonzalo is talking about, because he says there will be no occupation, there will be no agriculture, everyone will lead a very idle life, and no one will be king. No sovereignty, he refers to at the end, and immediately Antonio and Sebastian pick up on it, and yet would be king on it, because right at the beginning he had said, if I were king on this island, at the end of it he says no sovereignty, that is no supreme power. So he says, Antonio says at the later end of his Commonwealth forgets the beginning, that by the time he came to the end of what he was saying, he had forgotten the beginning. So for the second time again, kind of Gonzalo being caught on the wrong foot, the first time being his reference to Vido Dido. So all things in common nature should produce without sweat or endeavor, treason, felony, sword, pike, knife, gun, or need of any engine would I not have, but nature should bring forth of its own kind all poison, all abundance to fill my innocent, feed my innocent people. Poison is a reference to plenty, right? And engine is a reference to machine. Common means for the common use of all. So what he is saying is that nature will provide everything and different forms of violence. Now felony is essentially an offense such as murder or burglary, which is of a more serious nature than common kind of thefts, etc. So he says that nature will give everything, different forms of violence and crime will not be tolerated as far as his republic is concerned, right? Sebastian says no marrying among his subjects, that his subjects cannot marry, he just wants a clarification. So Antonio says no, and before Gonzalo can react, Antonio reacts saying that no, women will be prostitutes and all men will be rogues. I would with such perfection govern, sir, to excel the golden age. So Gonzalo is not answering this to men. He's talking directly and addressing his king, and he says that I will govern in such a way that it will be perfect, more perfect than the golden age. The golden age is when it was supposed to be the best kind of rule. And again he's talking about himself. So there is a contradiction in the manner in which Gonzalo is addressing Alonso. God save His Majesty, long live Gonzalo. So basically these two people continuing to make fun of Gonzalo. And do you mark me, sir? Prithee, no more. Thou dost talk nothing to me. Alonso does not want to listen to Gonzalo. He's really fed up of his big talk. Now Gonzalo in the next line, even though we were made to appear, it was made to appear as though he was not listening to what Sebastian and Antonio were saying. He was indeed listening to both of them. So he says that I know I was speaking nonsense. I do believe your highness, and I did to minister occasion to these gentlemen. Now minister is essentially provide occasion, that is provide an opportunity to these two gentlemen who are of such sensitive lungs that they are always used to laugh at nothing. So basically saying that I know I was speaking nonsense, but I was speaking nonsense for a reason, because I did it only to make Sebastian and Antonio laugh, because their lungs are so sensitive that they actually laugh at anything. So in that sense he is trying to make fun of them, basically giving it back to both Antonio and Sebastian. Antonio says, we were actually laughing at you. So Gonzalo says, who in this kind of merry fooling I am nothing to you, so you may continue and laugh at nothing. Now merry fooling essentially is referring to idle talk, right? So he says, I am nothing in comparison to you. So what it essentially means that you are actually laughing at nothing. So it's essentially idle banter that the three of them are indulging in. What a blow was there given, and it had not fallen flat long. Now it is like a blow. Now what Antonio and Sebastian are referring to is a sword or a dagger. Now when the sharp edge of the dagger falls, it obviously manages to cut the object on which it falls. But if the flat end falls, it does not manage to cut, so the effect is not much. It does not manage to pierce through or damage the object on which it falls. So basically trying to say that what you have, your retort does not really make much of a difference, because it falls, it's like a sword or a dagger that falls on the flat edge. So in that sense it is very, very harmless, because also we know it for a fact that it's also a polite. He gives it back, but he says it in a very polite kind of manner, unlike Sebastian and Antonio, who are openly mocking him. You are gentlemen of brave metal. You would lift the moon out of a sphere if she would continue in it 5 weeks without changing. So basically Gonzalo is showing his wit. It is a use of exaggeration, because he is saying that if the moon goes around in its orbit for more than 5 weeks, you would actually even pluck the moon out of its orbit, which is obviously an exaggeration, cannot be done. So he is basically taking a dig at them, basically citing something which is absolutely impossible. Explanation video number 3 and 4 are going to be important, because they will give you an insight into the characters, the real characters of Antonio especially, and even Sebastian, and what happens, the action that happens in explanation video number 4. So I would urge you to stay tuned with Study with Sudhir for the most comprehensive explanation of the Tempest. My throat is going for a toss. It's a lot of talking that one needs to do. So I hope this part of the explanation has been clear to you, and you are able to mark both the keywords, the meanings of different words, and also understand in which direction this play by Shakespeare is actually going. See you in explanation video number 3. All the best. Take care. Be safe. Thank you very much for watching.